Hi, and welcome to the NBA podcast. My name is Morten Jensen. And first and foremost, I would like to apologize for my absence. I moved across the country, so I haven't had a hell of a lot of time to podcast these last couple of weeks. So forgive my moving around, and I'm glad to be back. And of course, when I'm back like this, I have to bring on someone special, and that's Dan Favale of the HardwoodKnocks podcast. And today we are going to be discussing the most confusing teams in the NBA, because that's the thing with Dan and I. We figure out things where we can just list a bunch of players and teams and we can just go to town on them. That came out wrong, but you know what I mean. Welcome to the show, Dan Favale.
How are you doing, Mort? Thank you for having me as always.
I'm doing well, man. Obviously moving sucks because it always sucks. The whole process. It's nice to get to where you want to go, but the whole thing and packing up one house and packing out and it's just such a hassle because you just know you have this vision of oh, after 2 weeks of having moved in, there are not going to be any boxes left. You just know you're lying to yourself.
Right.
You're going to have boxes for the first 6 months. There's always going to be that one or two that's going to be left in some corner. You don't want to touch it. Your spouse doesn't want to touch it because none of you know where the hell things are going. And it's just going to stand there and it's going to test your marriage. You just know that's how it's going to work out.
Yeah, and for you specifically, the past 2 times I've moved, it's been within a half an hour of where I was living previously.
Nice.
Moving across the country, I have to imagine, is fucking wild. So I do not envy you, sir.
Yeah, no, that's and it's that's the thing, because now you also had to school change, job change. There was a whole bunch of things going in with this. So huge, but also super excited to start on something new, honestly. Just I've lived in Copenhagen all my life. So trying something else is gonna be exciting. I can't front. Basically just having this idea of you've always been in the same place, that bores me. It really bores me. And I'm pushing on 40, Dan. Come on. Had to try something new before 40.
Yeah, and what better time than to move across the country during the smack dab in the middle of the NBA regular season, huh?
Right. Super that was convenient. So smart on my behalf. So smart. Yep.
Where you've been in the business long. I planned my wedding around the NBA schedule. That's how it works. I don't deserve kudos for it. That's just a matter of, I'm sure other people do that with whatever their jobs are, but you planted a move in the middle of the NBA Cup tournament. Come on, Mort.
Too. Yeah, I know.
The finals is one thing. The NBA playoffs, yeah, move during that. We've been there, seen that. We're talking about the NBA Cup, Mort.
Look, I was just trying to avoid free agency. That's my busy time, the draft and free agency.
Which is interesting because it sucks now. Free agency is always busy in the lead up, and then everyone's left sort of bag holding when they thought there was going to be all this content and all these big moves to react to, and there's not anymore. At least not on the same frequency scale.
No, and honest, the one thing that I really miss in the free agency game, it's the surprises. The last time I was genuinely surprised, that was when Woj came with the whole DeMarcus Cousins has signed with the Golden State Warriors tweet. That's for some reason, that's the one that sticks out. That was the last time where I was oh, this is crazy. This is free agency Lollapalooza, and everything else since then has just gone down.
I don't know when the last time I was really floored by, oh, this player signed for that or ended up there was, but I will say most recently, the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, the timing shocked me. I did not that was not, you understood the name, the destination, that stuff had been in the ether, but the actual timing of it all, it shook me. I was what the hell's happening here? Especially I had taken an edible at the time and I was just praying that I wasn't going to be one of the people called in to do immediate reactions for it. I couldn't even do an immediate reaction pod. Grant and I waited. I was Dan's high. He doesn't know what's going on right now.
No, I will agree with that. I think for me, I was just basically expecting Randall to get traded because there was no way I could see that whole, lineup make sense.
Doing it right as you're going into training camp, knowing that whatever you're going to do is not going to it's going to disrupt your train. The timing really it seems like the NBA is good for at least one of those WTF transactions. For whatever reason, the WTFness exists. It does feel like we get at least one of those every mid-season and every summer still.
Yeah. We just need a very entertaining trade deadline to make up for the fact that we don't have free agency really anymore.
Yeah, but I really do believe, based off things that have just been said off the record,
Mm-hmm.
that teams still don't really know how to navigate the collective bargaining agreement right
Right.
now. And I think the trade parameters specifically, coupled with trying to figure out like, well, how punitive are these aprons actually, and
Mm-hmm.
worrying about frozen draft picks and figuring out those rules. I really do believe I'm normally, I want to make it clear, I'm normally an optimist when it comes to the trade deadline. I always predict chaos.
Yep.
I think there's going to be more behind the scenes chaos than actual just people thought last year's trade deadline was going to be a letdown. I'll be happy if we get as active a
Yeah.
trade deadline this year.
I have to be, the sourpuss every single day when Danish listeners and Danish NBA fans send me like 4-team trades. Like, hey Mort, how about this? And it includes like 6 all-stars. And I'm just like, oh honey, I don't even know where to begin.
Oh, honey, baby,
This
sweetie. Yeah.
Oh, honey, baby, sweetie pumpkin. This is, I'm so sorry. Like, and some of them are even like really well thought out. Like, they're not bad traits. It's like it solves like 4 teams. So, like, there's some person that's been sitting there for like a couple hours, like coming up with a great trade. And I'm just like, 2 of those teams probably don't even understand like the predicament they're in financially. Like, it's just not going to happen. I'm so sorry.
Look, I had reached the point for years and years. I have my own spreadsheet of like, do these trades work? This CBA shot that entire thing to hell, and
Yeah.
it's thank God the Spotrac trade machine exists.
Right.
Hat tip
Yeah.
Keith Smith. Because even I've done trade stuff for Bleacher Report lately. I think one even published where like I included an extra player in a team that couldn't aggregate. And
Mm-hmm.
this was over the offseason. And now it's just I've even seen on sites where it's like X trades that could totally happen right now, and then they're just
Right.
illegal in the actual. So go to the Spotrac NBA trade machine. It is a lifeline. Whether you're just, I'm not talking about just for us. Like if you want to, the
Yeah.
basis of any trade would be, hey, can this actually happen? Even if you're just
Right.
hypothesizing it. And thank God for the Spotrac trade machine right now. That's all I have to
I,
say.
I'm super glad you calling it Spotrac because I did so too, and I learned that it's actually Spot Rack, which is
Keith
like okay,
corrects me every time I have
yeah,
him on the show, and
same.
I feel terrible that I forget after every time he corrects
I
me.
just
So
ignore Keith on that one because I think Spotrac sounds better,
a spot rack just doesn't roll off the tongue is fun.
right?
Maybe I'm
Exactly.
addicted to saying Spo too. That might
Right.
be it.
Yeah. They should just add Coach Spotrac. There we go. That'd be awesome. By the way, we're talking about trades, and that's actually a little bit of a teaser for the next episode. Like we're doing these double episodes. We've done them a couple months in a row. We're probably going to keep doing them for a while, just so everyone is kind of clued into the fact that we're doing this. So the next episode we're going to do is about teams that
We
are
should
going
have
to
saved this
more or
preamble
less
for that
dictate.
one. Yeah.
Right, going to dictate the trade deadline. hopefully, so we get some action, and that's going to be in both our feeds too. But that's where you're going to play the host. That's how we're doing things right now. I love it.
You're
This is,
doing a terrible job playing the host for your own subject matter then by
I know,
spilling into mine. What's going on
I
here?
know, I know. I'm well. Then let's get back on track. Most confusing teams, and Dan, we broke it down. So I had the West, you had the East, and we're basically looking at teams that we have a hard time, getting a real idea about, despite the fact that we're like 25 games into the season. Like we watch these teams on a regular basis, and even though we do, we look at them and we kind of go, who are they? Are we sure we know who they are? So, Dan, you're first up. Who are you going with here?
Mort, I'm going to start with a team that was not confusing me in the slightest until they got so injured that I'm just fascinated to see what their direction ends up being. That's
Yeah.
the Orlando Magic. One, they're a confusing as hell team because both of their star players, Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, which is the last time I will say it like that. You told me to try it. I gave it a shot.
Yep.
Have
You
oblique
did.
injuries. And then I don't remember who tweeted this, but I saw or skeeted it. I saw that the last NBA player to deal with an oblique injury was Cole Anthony of the Orlando Magic.
Yeah.
Something, first of all, that's confusing the hell out of me. There needs to be an investigation done even to what's happening to the core of these players' bodies by being on the Magic. But now I look at them as a team, and theoretically, they've confused me a few times over because as soon as Paolo went down, at the time, he was probably in my top 5 MVP ballot. We're talking about 4
Mhm.
games or whatever it is, so not a big deal. And I was just like, they're done. It's over. Then Franz comes out. He's playing exceptionally well, averaging like 27 points off assists per 100 possessions to his teammates without Paolo. Just absurd. Above average offense when he's playing without Paolo. Also absurd.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now he goes down. And it's just initially before they lost Paolo, and then it took, I thought, all right, they're done. They need to make a trade. Oh, they don't need to make a trade, but they're going to be good enough with or without Paolo to then still go kind of make a trade at the deadline. They felt the quintessential one player away team, or
Yeah.
left alone, were they the third best team in the Eastern Conference squad, where it's you have the Celtics and the Cavs, and there's still teams that are vying for that position. Now I'm just, again, I understand the identity of this team, what they were doing before these injuries. And to their credit, they have taken more threes as a share of their shots this year. They just aren't going in. I don't know what to expect from their offense moving forward. Also, right down to the fact that what do, Mr. Mort, after their first game without Paolo and Franz? They win.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, too. This team is gritty as hell. They're fascinating as hell. The defense is absolutely hellfire, just to continue using the hell word. But I also, and maybe I'm overthinking this, Paolo, as we're recording this, the latest update was there's still no timetable for his return. So if
Right.
he's been out this long without a timetable,
Mhm.
what does that mean for Franz? And then if you're the Magic, how do you juggle the weight of immediacy when you know that you might only have one or none of your star players for more than half the year? At
Yeah.
that point, I don't, because I look at this team, I look at their assets, I look at their timeline. Yeah, they can do nothing and view this as, we'll be scrappy as hell. We'll see if we can make some noise in the playoffs if everybody gets healthy. But it's also,
Mhm.
all right, you've now paid 2 of these dudes in Suggs and Wagner. Their deals are going to kick in next year. Paolo's coming right down
Right.
the pipeline. And you know what you need. The way they lost in the playoffs last year, it was predictable. Their struggles this year without Paolo, also predictable. And now it's just, well, does it ring hollow to say this team should still consider itself a serious threat when, again, it's not just the fact that both Paolo and Franz are down, it's that we really just don't have a hold on even when one of them is going to come back.
Mm. I mean, look, so in a way we can say they're confusing because we don't know who they are going to be without them, but at the same time, I think their situation I don't think their situation necessarily is confusing. It's like your two best players like just went down with the same injury, and like the leap from Paolo and Franz to Jalen Suggs, at least from an offensive perspective, is significant. Like
Would you say
it's
that a leap? Would you say that's a leap to Jalen Suggs or a
I would
descent?
say that is quite the leap, to the point where I'm like I don't really know who's going to be the focal point of the offense moving forward here, because like I actually really like Jalen Suggs, but even though he shot like 39% from three last year, I wasn't necessarily sold on that being a sign of what's to come. Like I always want a couple more years to buy into a player's shooting. We've seen this year that shooting has gone down from the outside. Now, granted, some of that is also Paolo going out after 5 games. So you don't have that guy who just draws every single double team that he can, meaning
Yeah,
less
who's the two
valuable
to the
shots.
ball guy on this team
Right.
right now?
Exactly. And right now there isn't anyone. Like I think
Gogo
it would be
Batadze would beg to differ, but please carry on.
yeah, what did he have like in the
He dropped
Suns win? Like
21, I think, the other night.
was
And
it
Suggs got
21,
up 10
16?
threes. Good for
Yeah.
him in that game. He was, I
Yeah.
think, 4 of 10.
But like I honestly think you kind of said it. I would lean into let's see what happens, but this is where I'm still a little upset at the KCP signing, because I just don't think they spent their money wisely. They had Jet Howard, who they drafted 11th overall, just kind of waiting in the wings, and like here is a 31-year-old you're kind of just signing to cock block his minutes. Where I'm like, why wouldn't you want to give him a chance when you drafted him in the lottery, right? So I was like, that didn't make a lot of sense to me. At the same time, I still think they could use a real point guard. I know that that's a drum that Magic fans are tired of hearing, and I apologize, but I just because Magic fans are tired of hearing that criticism, I don't think it's less important. I don't think it makes it less true. They do need someone who can run the show. Jalen Suggs is at best a combo. Anthony Black is a project. It's like a project with some upside at the very least, but like they don't have that guy who you can give the ball to, who can handle the offense and say, look, I'm going to make a play. I'm going to make a decision. I'm constantly going to break down defenses and make sure we get to that point where we need to go. That guy isn't there. So it's going to be fascinating as well to see who comes out of this as, the best player moving forward. If that is Goga Pitatse, then good on him. And then we're going to probably have to ask, some major questions about Wendell Carter Jr.'s future.
Does the calculus for them though change at all because I've kind of pushed back. It does feel like they still need an offensive organizer, in a vacuum. But if you're going to have one of Paolo or Franz, does it make your trade scope more particular in the sense, or even if you don't want to view it through the prism of a trade, just saying this is what we need, but it's more particular to where you want someone who is closer to a combo guard because you don't want to take the ball out of Franz or Paolo's hands too much. And so rather than, I've seen a lot of people link them to, well, look at De'Aaron Fox's situation in Sacramento. Is that someone whose name could pop up? He'd be a great fit in Orlando. I don't have a doubt he'd be a good fit, but like, I also think that someone along the lines of Anthony Simons is a name that gets thrown around a lot.
Yep.
Can you rescue whatever's happening with Terry Rozier in Miami? They could even be an interesting Tyler Hero team if Miami ever decided to sell. It feels like they could go after a player in that vein who kind of, it helps alleviate the burden our offense is facing in the interim without one or both of Franz and Paolo. But then this isn't going to necessarily disrupt too much of what's happening when we have both of those available. In fact, it should better optimize our offense for the playoffs in the aggregate, however you would like to frame it.
Well, I mean, look, so the situation they should be looking for is basically the situation that the Spurs have right now with Chris Paul, right? Like Chris obviously is their point guard, but if you watch them play, you'll notice that he's not necessarily the guy handling the ball 80-85% of the time, right? The ball goes through the hands of Wemby, it goes through Stephon Castle, it goes through Devin Vassell when he's healthy. Like, and he's sort of this break glass in case of emergency point guard now, where, hey, look, if we are in a slump, if we need something, if we need, your high caliber of point guard experience, we can go to you. You are an option. And I think that's the type of player they need. Not, everyone needs a Chris Paul. Like, I'm not saying Chris Paul specifically, but someone who can play off of those two without necessarily dominating the ball. But if you go into an offensive lull, then you can hand the ball to that guy and he can just say, hey, yeah, I got this. Like a guy who I think would fit that bill. Unfortunately, he's not going to be available. That's Tyus Jones. Like Tyus Jones would be that guy for them.
Do you know this guy might not be available either, but the actual perfect acquisition for Orlando, I still think is Kobe White.
Love it. Yep.
That's the trade where it's going to cost you assets, but he makes a small enough. It's not going to cost you at nearly everything. And he comes in full strength, half strength, whatever your roster's at. You got to take the Magic way more seriously than you are in this moment.
Hell, there's another Bulls guard that would make sense there, and that's
money though. Oh, I thought you were going to say Zach LaVine, who would also make sense in Orlando.
Yeah, no. If we're talking about a guy who can come in and handle the ball and make plays as well, like Ayo Dosunmu would make sense there. Like a big guard defensively, he's very solid, has been since he came into the league. The 3-point shooting is a little bit up and down, but we can say the same about every single Magic player right now.
Right. And that's sort of the other thing is I think anyone who they get on the ball, off the ball, like you need to know that they're a caps lock shooter. And so I couldn't throw a Dosunmu in there. Even Fox, when he has like the step back going and can score from the mid range, I want someone who I'd rather, if you're going to make the ultra home run trade, which I think that would be a weird route to go objectively for the Magic. You have to figure out a way to straddle the in-between now post injuries. LaMelo Ball would be like the absolute home run name rather than someone who's going to be an up and down shooter to me anyway.
Oh, see, that's the perfect situation because I'm not as high on LaMelo as a lot of people, but in that situation specifically, where he wouldn't have, carte blanche to just go out and jack up 30-foot threes whenever he wants to, where there's like a hierarchy that's going to have to be established where he will have to streamline his own shot profile, I would love that. That's a great call. Like, you would have to give up something, of course.
So to wrap on them, I just want to make it clear. I wanted to talk about the Franz injury because I had him. We did our
Yes.
quarter season awards. He was 4th on my MVP ballot, Mort, and I think he
All
deserved
right.
to be there. And I separate value from like all NBA because it's like value. I think you speak to more of the, well, where would this team be without them type deal. But regardless, huge loss. And I still find the Magic more compelling than I thought I was going to following the Paolo Banchero injury specifically. But now I think they have a lot of, I don't know if they're tough or just interesting decisions to make or calls to make or things to explore now that your 2 best players are absent.
Yeah. No, I agree. Because of all the things we outlined, absolutely confusing. I have
Who
a
do you
team
have?
that's confused. Yeah,
Oh,
so
I'm ready.
I have one that, and it's weird to call them confusing when they're 16-8 in the West. The Houston Rockets are confusing to me because here's
Ooh.
the thing. Oh yeah, no. So here's the thing. They are winning off of bench defense, right? Amin Thompson, Tari Eason have won them a ton of games. Like, it's to the point where I'm asking myself, what about that starting lineup? How much juice does that really have? Because you have Fred VanVleet, who's a sub 40% shooter from the field, not just from range, from the field. The same with Jalen Green, and both of them are in like the 32% range from three. So like the efficiency from either is just not there. I think that's fair to say. Dylan Brooks as well, like 42% from the field, not necessarily a high efficiency player. So you have your starting perimeter trio are not necessarily major offensive boosters in terms of like maximizing your offensive efficiency. If you can't really count on those guys to produce at the level that they'll need to, what exactly is the ceiling of this team into going into the rest of the season? I do have some questions about that. Like, don't get me wrong, I love the fact that Tari Eason and Ahmed Thompson, are killing it from the bench and winning them games because of their play. But I do think there are legitimate question marks about, their starting lineup and how they're shooting and how they're producing. Like, hell, we can even throw Jabari Smith in there. Also not necessarily a high efficiency scorer. They have some issues despite their record.
They have issues, but it's also like that starting lineup, I think, is like a +8 per 100 on the season.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, they're getting it all done with defense. I'm curious. Everyone seems to view them. I mean, by the way, they could just pull this lever. I don't know what this does to the rest of their rotation, but you insert Amen Thompson for Jalen Green and that resulting lineup,
Yeah.
even though spatially it feels like it should be worse, they're just steamrolling opponents right now. I think
Yeah.
that's something that people are already calling for, and I don't think that's going to be quieted. I do think because of the assets they have, because some of their young guys, I mean, Şengün and Jalen Green already got extended, and you're going to have to talk about Tari Eason and Jabari Smith Jr. leading into this summer. I think people have pegged them, rightfully so, as a big time trade candidate. I've kind
Yeah.
of looked at that and said the extensions for Şengün and Jalen Green specifically prove to me any decisions happening over the offseason if it's going to be
Yes.
major.
Agreed.
So
Yeah.
I want to know your opinion. My thought for them has been if you can just, and technically because you have Reed Shepherd, the answer long term might already be on the roster. But what if I view one of their biggest offensive problems, I would say, as not having the floor open enough to where, okay, these guys are missing shots. They're not necessarily getting the highest quality of perimeter looks. And for someone like Green or Van Fleet, or even look at the space with which Jabari Smith Jr. and Alperen Şengün have to work with,
Right.
what if you could just open the floor with someone who's going to fly around or at least stretch defenses? And so rather than people, and I'm not looping you into this, saying they need to go get another type of point guard or just they need to consolidate and get a mega offensive upgrade. If you added, and just to shoot, like I've mentioned his name a few times, Rockets fans don't love it. If you just turn two of your, I think Landale and, excuse me, there's Jeff Green, there's Landale, and who's the other whatever contract? Oh, but they have these whatever contracts. You could just
Mm-hmm.
trade two of them for Duncan Robinson. And if you kind of insert him into some of these lineups, I think the floor opens up for everybody else inside the arc. And that could, I would argue, optimize or further weaponize an offense
Right.
that, look, even to date, like they're 11th in points per possession. This is not, you look at a bunch of other teams, and what do we say? Rank in the top 10 of offense and defense. They're second in defense, 11th in offense.
Yep.
They have their case to just leave it alone is fine. But I recognize I have had the same questions as you have in the sense of even looking at their net rating against top 10 teams this year. I think they rank 5th in net rating against top 10 teams. That's
Right.
great. But over the course of a playoff series, I will say it does feel like their offense seems a bit solvable.
Right. No, it does, and I think some of that's gotten lost in all this is the fact that we're talking about like Amin Thompson and Tari Eason as defenders coming off the bench, as I outlined earlier, but both of them are also scoring like 11, 12 points per game. They're getting an offensive boost from those guys. Um, that matters. Like you need to have those offensive producers, but if you don't have the floor spacing, if you don't have the high efficiency player rolling around out there, I think your call is right on. Like Duncan Robinson would be so fun to watch there because the way that he moves off the ball, I don't think a lot of people really appreciate just how much effort he puts in to making himself open. Like he forces defenses out of whack constantly, like constantly. That would open a lot of fun driving lanes, a lot of fun like backdoor opportunities. Like Amin Thompson would feast next to a guy like
Yeah.
Duncan Robinson. I would
Yeah,
love that.
the contract I was forgetting is like you have Tate and Landale, and they're
Right.
basically expiring. And if the Heat want to get off Robinson's money for whatever reason,
Yep.
like do you attach some seconds? I like that deal, but I think when you're looking at the playoffs, because look, the Rockets are good. They're contending for one of the
Yep.
top spots in the West. You have to look at, okay, what's the playoff viability of what they're doing at both ends of the floor? The defense, 11 of 10, no notes. I have zero questions. The offense, you're doing a lot of your stuff is like predicated on getting in transition. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that against select opponents will go away in the playoffs. And so they're
Yep.
24th in half court offense. And they're going to be even worse. Like when you get to that position, they're still, I think they're first in offensive rebounding in the half court. So like if you're going to have to filter that stuff out of the equation, like their first shot offense is just not very good relative. I think you could argue that it's bordering on tragic statistically. And that's something that I think I don't say they need to go out and get the player who improves their like needs to
Agree.
be, I guess, a primary option for their first shot offense. But I would like to see them get someone who opens up all of their other options for that first shot half court
Right.
offense.
No, and look, that's not a hard sell from either. Like you said earlier, in terms of like you're not looping me in with going out and consolidating. I've been against consolidating for a while for these guys because the names they were bringing up were guys in like their mid-30s. I don't think that's the way to go about this. Like you have to somewhat stay true to the timeline to a certain extent. I know that it's not always like you can get guys who are between 24 and 25, I guess, and then continue that route. Like, but going after Jimmy Butler, for example, at age 35, going on 36 next year, like that.
There's
No.
there's like two players over the age of 35 I would listen to a case for, and it's Steph Curry and Kevin Durant, just because
Yep.
of what those two are on offense. And beyond that, it seems like they are thinking along the same lines because all the picks that they've acquired. I mean, one, they've decided we're just going to co-opt Phoenix's future, which I believe is smart. But like they have all these distant firsts. It's very much optionality where they're going to have to make some decisions because they can't
Yep.
fit all these guys on the roster moving forward. But I don't even think they were. Maybe we'll see some movement this summer, but like the way they've structured themselves with assets, this was never a team that I thought viewed itself as, well, we have to consolidate right
Right.
now.
It's super interesting though because I understand the appeal. Like you're looking at a guy like Cam Whitmore as well, who hasn't played a whole lot this year, but he was super intriguing last year. You want to get some of those guys more minutes. Like Reed Shepard is also only playing like 11 minutes per game. Like I understand why fans and pundits are like, hey, don't you want to see more of insert player X here? But like if you're 16-8, you also have to say somewhat true to the current core, I
Well,
guess. But like, I'm still confused though. Like, that's what I was. I like watching them, watching them play. Like, I do think they have some juice, but it feels like they're very Orlando Magic-ish from last year, where if they make it to the playoffs, it's gonna take like what, a game two at most if they're up against a very competent team to just figure out their offense in its entirety.
but you did outline another problem, which might be why they're confusing. I haven't considered them confusing because I think they're great, but
Mm-hmm.
you've sold me effectively is who are you getting? You're mentioning these are guys that are not getting a ton of minutes in Reed Shepard and Cam Whitmore.
Right.
Who are you like? You're saying stay true to the current core. But it's like, well, then who do you trade for that would also be good enough to deserve minutes, and then you're eventually going to rip those away from who? I mean, the easy answer is just like Jalen Green. Let's just strip those minutes down,
Yeah,
baby.
yeah,
But like that's
yeah.
also a complication here where it's okay, yeah, you want to stay true to what you're doing, but whoever you trade for, if you're giving up players who aren't really playing or who aren't integral, you got to find minutes from somewhere.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. And ultimately that's what I think makes them confusing. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, Rockets fans should not take this as a point of criticism, because they have been fun to watch and they're winning and they're playing an exciting brand of ball. But it's tough to me to look at this roster and go, oh yeah, like Western Conference Finals, baby. I'm not there. I am not. I don't think they're gonna make, like, a Trae Young Hawks run in 2021 anytime soon. Okay, Dan. So who is next on your list of most confusing teams in the NBA?
I'm going to go with a team that doesn't seem to understand the plot of this season, and that is the Chicago Bulls, who are sitting
Yeah.
10th as we record this in the Eastern Conference. They've won entirely too many games for where they should be headed, more
Right.
games than I think people would be expected. They have the gall to be way more watchable than I was ever predicting this season. They play fast, they play free. Zach LaVine has been an absolute joy this season. Nikola Vucevic is not making any sense because he's hitting all these shots. Kobe
Right.
White remains a delight. Josh Giddey's first team all empty calories numbers. That's really fun to see.
Mm-hmm.
I look, the Bulls have been they've been way more entertaining. Their defense sucks. It's also been cool
Yep.
to see Lonzo Ball actually on the court. Their defense sucks. I don't understand like what is going on here because this might spill into some of the trade talk we'll eventually do. So I don't want to harp too much on the trade stuff of it all. The organization apparently like is not getting a ton of good offers for Zach LaVine and Vooch at this point. And
Right.
that kind of underscores what we already knew, that the offers for these guys were never going to get a lot better. And so why are they still on this team, or why are they still playing so many minutes? And what is your direction? And again, this is not, oh, you don't watch the Bulls if you think they suck. I don't think they suck. And that's the problem. This team
Right.
needs to suck. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't, their direction sucks. It's incoherent. And they continue to confuse me because as you look at the way they've played this year, and all right, these are all good harbingers, but because you have guys on the contracts you do, unless you were looking to move Kobe White, which I could argue that still should be in consideration just because of the contract he's on. Do you want to pay him
Right.
mega dollars when you're not going to be good enough? But I'm throwing that out of the equation. Like, does Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic, if at all, if they don't play another second this season, their trade value to me isn't really going to change. And so it's time to really lean into this skid rather than are you going to continue to chase spots 9 through 12 in the East? And I do think what's happening too is they're sacrificing some like valuable time here because there are just Eastern Conference teams and teams in the NBA that are so much worse. When you look at Washington specifically in the East, New Orleans has been a disaster this year. The Jazz are determined not to win any basketball games. This team should be in contention for just like a bottom 5 record flat out. And yes, that is still possible, but at the same time, it's all right. We're getting to a point where trade season's about to kick off. Do you understand what the plot of this season's supposed to be from them? And I say this is just, I also would argue I didn't expect them to be in this predicament if they didn't make. You could have given me this exact rotational pattern that they have right now, and I would have predicted that the Bulls are far worse than they actually are. And so that is a credit
Oh,
to the players, to the coaching staff for sure. Again, they've been pretty entertaining on the offensive end this year, but I also feel like what they're doing right now is potentially problematic for their long-term future.
you basically just spoiled the entire article that I wrote about them over at Yahoo a couple months ago, because that was basically it. You just summed it up in like a 2 minute, 3 minute blurb. That's exactly the point. I commend them for actually changing their shot profile, because I don't want to be one of those people. I've been harping on this for years that they had one of the league's worst shot profiles. Then when they go out and actually change it, I do think it deserves some level of note, of compliment, really, because finally you do something that's the right thing to do. But the timing of which is so utterly confusing, so weird, which is just the perfect way. Like, this should really be just a Chicago Bulls episode, because it makes no sense. Nothing makes sense here. Like, this is the year they should bottom out for Cooper Flag. They refuse to bottom out for Wemby. and like it just it's almost bewildering at this point why they persist in this idea that, hey, look, trying to make it in to the play-in tournament beats going out and actually getting a chance at a real-time superstar. Like I know there are no assurances in the draft. Don't get me wrong. I'm
Right.
not saying that you're going to win number one, but like the 2025 draft. Let's just be real about this. Everyone worth listening to are saying, "Oh yeah, the draft is back, baby. This is going to be a sick year. Like it's going to be a lot of all-stars in this draft." And the Bulls are like, "Nope." And they even owe this year's pick to the Spurs, at least if it falls outside the top 10. So, like, could you imagine that they get 11th and they have to fork that thing over? And the Spurs just gets an all-star at that point. Like, it's so, and like, they should have learned their lesson, because remember when they traded for Vooch, who ultimately did the Magic get for him? Franz Wagner. Like, again, Jet Howard too. I mean, they just don't learn from their mistakes.
But you know what is also confusing is, what do you think that they're doing wrong, specifically when you look at who, like, the roster as, because we could say trade, like the Zach LaVine, if you have an offer for Zach LaVine that doesn't entail ruining your books or costing you picks, ditto for Vooch, just do it, because that feels like, or stop playing them. That will be politically disastrous, and I can't imagine either would be happy about it.
Right.
That almost feels like, because they've done, like, we know a lot more about, maybe it took them too long to get to Modest Buzelis this year, like, who didn't play that much during the first 15 games or whatever, but now we have more information on him. I never would have guessed that I had Julian Phillips moments that were actually encouraging this season. So they are, like, we've seen stuff from a team that is somewhat acting like it's in this interim period, but not enough. And I don't know who to, I mean, like, you're playing, like, Josh Giddey and Patrick Williams play, and they're statistically, yes, they can, Josh Giddey specifically will have good numbers, but his on-court time, like, that's been damaging to wins. And that's good. Then play Patrick Williams more. Up that offensive usage, baby. Let's see. I want to see more Patrick Williams ISOs. Let's have this guy operate over ball screens, running pick and rolls. But that's also what makes them confusing to me is, do you think that moving, or like, because I guess what I'm getting at is, it feels like the most effective way for them to get where we believe they need to be is to make the call that we know they're not ready to make, and say, well, it's not just a matter of moving Zach LaVine and Vooch. It's Kobe White. It's time to capitalize on that. Like, that's what I'm waiting for, is the tough decision of, because even when it got to Caruso and DeRozan, it was just, well, DeRozan's a free agent. That's a sign and trade. The decision was almost kind of made for you, but not really. And Caruso was very anticlimactic the way that ended. You didn't get any picks for. Get out in front of, now you have Zach LaVine and Vooch to points where I would say they have definitely been degraded as trade assets on their current contracts, regardless of how well they're playing. And don't get to that point with someone else where it's Kobe White. I don't think his trade value is ever going to be higher than it is now. Honestly, it's probably been lower since the summer, just because he has less time left on one of the biggest deals one of the best deals, in the league. And I understand that he's young enough to be part of the next phase of their plan. You got to map out what the next phase of that plan is for me before you sell me on keeping this player, who I think is more valuable to you and where you should be going as a trade asset. And I think that is probably the most unpopular Bulls opinion I would have relative to Chicago fans. And I think that's fine. But, like, I just yet to see this team make decisions that point toward a singular, coherent vision for beyond the moment. And they're still, right now, again, maybe they were expecting to be worse. We saw this with the Jazz a couple years ago, 2 straight seasons of just being better than they expected. I get it, but, like, the Bulls' margin for error isn't what the Jazz have, because they didn't get here by trading a bunch of big names and getting a ton of draft picks the way that the Jazz did.
Fully agree. I wrote about this in September because, like you, I've been voicing the Kobe White thing for a while now, much to the frustration of Bulls fans.
Which I get. I don't want to be the person that's, your team needs to trade all of their good players. But, like, the Bulls have kind of put themselves in, and maybe it's just, all right, don't trade Kobe White, but, like, you really need to steer into this skid somehow. And it's Zach LaVine and Vooch are kind of used as the 2 biggest billboards for where they are. And they've been 2 of their 3 best players this season. But like, I don't even know. Maybe that will do enough damage. If it's just, hey, not really playing those guys or moving them, okay, do that and then see where.
Right.
But to still be here, where and I guess it would be different even too if it. Well, those guys really aren't playing a ton of minutes. Zach LaVine's at 33 plus for the season. Nikola Vucevic is at. Granted, they don't just have bigs at all, but he's almost at 32
Right.
minutes per game. So it doesn't feel like this team understands what I won't even say it has a plan and it's backfired. I don't think they even understand what they're supposed to be doing at the moment.
Right. No, and so that is basically the consensus as well, which is like Arturas Karnisovas and Mark Eversley, that they have some serious shortcomings in understanding how to take advantage of certain situations. The Kobe White thing, like again, I wrote about this in September. I understand their predicament because of the 140% extension limit. And to some extent, I also sympathize with the Bulls because let's be real, the 140% extension limit, which raised from 120 in the recent CPA, is penalizing teams for negotiating well. Like that's the one thing the Bulls have done extremely well. Like they got, you know, Kobe White back. What was that deal? 3 years, 36 million.
36.
That's exceptional value. Ayo Sumo, 3 years, 21 million. Also exceptional value. Like even the Jalen Smith contract this year, which was I think 3 years, 28 right now. Was it 28? Somewhere along those lines. It wasn't
327, I think. Although to be fair, that hard
27.
capped them and then made the entire DeMar DeRozan of it all more difficult. So
Right. But even though I'm just talking about like the value, they know how to get bang for the buck in terms of like contractual assets. So it is hard to like point the finger at the Bulls and say, well, look, you're dumb because you got Kobe White back on a great deal. Like the league shouldn't penalize teams for getting guys back on good deals. Like it's a dumb thing. And I asked Mark Tatum this somewhat recently, and he was like, well, we haven't had that conversation yet, but we're gonna review it and we'll see down the line about the 140% rule. But like, fact of the matter remains, the 140% limit is in place. You can't extend Kobe White because why would he ever agree to that? You haven't made yourself attractive enough for Kobe to sit there in free agency in 2026 and go, oh my God, I love the Bulls. You're so competitive. I can really win here. No, he's going to fucking leave. That's going to happen. Let's just be real about it.
You have to, I would argue yes, but also if they're willing to pay him, he might just stay. They're going to, the free agency market.
So yes, there is that. I know that they can pay him, but here's the thing: you're still risking him going into unrestricted free agency. That's kind of my point.
Yeah,
like you can't necessarily bang on the fact that you're able to contain him. That's the thing. You have to risk it, and if he then leaves, you get nothing in return for him. You don't get jack in return. So the trade that I came up with, I don't know if I ever mentioned this to you. I probably have. It's a Spurs trade. I'm sending both him and Io to the Spurs. Did I ever?
No, I don't think.
No. All right. Zach Collins and Malachi Branham goes back. That's just the contractual stuff. Okay. The Bulls get their full control of their pick back 2025 this year. So like they have it. Even if they finish 11th or 12th, it's theirs. And then they get the unprotected Hawks pick in 2027 via the Spurs.
I wonder if that's enough. Just because
you can ask for more. Like Jason Pat said the same thing to me when I pitched him this. Like he said, you can probably ask for more. That's fine. But like as a raw parameter, I don't hate that construct.
No, I don't hate it either. I think you would probably, because the thing about getting control back of your own pick this year is that if you're trading Kobe White, like you don't have to worry about that pick conveying. So I don't know what type of and if you don't want it to convey, let's be honest, you can make sure it doesn't convey without regaining control of it. So, and I guess, what is it?
Well, you can worry about it if Nikola Vucevic keeps shooting 59% from the field. Come on,
man. My point is, you can control that though by not playing him or playing him less or trading him. So,
that's true.
But yeah, I mean, Kobe White or San Antonio, Orlando, you can name a bunch of teams where he makes a ton of sense. Right. I just don't know if the Bulls are thinking in those terms. I don't even know if they're thinking in those terms enough with Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic, which probably a good time to get to your next team, but that really just spotlights the problem here.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, look, we can go so long on this team because I think we can also agree like, Dan, that this has to be the most confusing team in the NBA. Like, of all the teams that we're talking about, they have to be at top.
Yeah, I think that they're close to it. I think you could probably make some like confusing cases for good teams where it's kind of like, well, why are the
Right.
Clippers this good? Like, be pleasantly confused. But in terms of just like just immeasurable confusion, yeah, they're definitely topping the charts there.
Well, thank you for that segue. I really appreciate it because we are going to the Los Angeles Clippers. That actually was the next team on my list. So thank you for that. I'm just confused at how they keep winning. I'm impressed. Don't get me wrong. I'm very impressed, but I'm also confused, and I'm wondering if the clock is ticking on this because they are 14-11 in the Western Conference with James Harden shooting under or hitting under 38% of his shots this year, which is like, if I told you that before the season, just knowing well that Kawhi wasn't going to play and James Harden was going to hit like 37.9% of his shots 24 games into the season, you would have told me that they would have been right in line for Cooper Flag. We're not there, man. We're not there. They're winning. I mean, I saw them at the Intuit Dome come back and beat the Spurs after being down 40-14 in the first quarter. Like, they have some fight. They have some gusto. Like, I'm still confused about their ceiling, but I'm also just confused as how do they keep getting away with this?
Look, we kind of just discussed when we were doing awards because we were talking about Chris Dunn for all defense. Sort of relitigated their decision to let Paul George walk, and then the machinations that allowed you. Primarily, you brought back Nick Batum, you bring in Chris Dunn, you bring in Derrick Jones Jr. The defense of this team is just ferocious, and I think you probably could have predicted most of that. The things that stand out there for me specifically would be, okay, how are they this small? They have one guy who's taller than 6'8", who's a heavy used rotation player. That's Ivica Zubac. And yet they're first in defensive rebounding, despite so they're second now behind Golden State. So that's something that stood out. And then offensively, Norman Powell just looking like a viable number 2 option, upping his self-creation, getting downhill more, still not facilitating a ton. That's fine, but his efficiency is intact in spite of this just demonstrable, uptick. I can't talk while I'm sick, apparently. Uptick in volume. So they have confused me as well. But you know where the confusion kind of stems from now is that you thought they were kind of just trapped in no man's land because you mentioned they should be first in line for Cooper Flag. Doesn't fucking matter. Oklahoma City would be first in line for Cooper Flag if the Clippers were bad.
Yeah, that's true. That is a very fair point. But you know what I meant, though? Like, I expected them to be bottom in the league.
But that makes them more confusing because it seems like they were kind of just going to eat their medicine and either tear it down anyway or just hover near the bottom of the middle of the league. And now they haven't had Kawhi play yet. And if you come back, if he's even playing 20 minutes a game, that is huge for your offense. The load that it takes off James Harden's shoulders. But then they're also confusing because did you ever expect me to ask you this question, Mort? Should the 2025 Los Angeles Clippers view themselves as aggressive buyers at the deadline because they're still in this window? Like, they have Kawhi on the roster. You don't own your picks anyway. You're good enough to hover without Kawhi Leonard, without a good offense around the fringes of the Western Conference playoff discussion. Shouldn't you #go for it, whatever that looks like? But then you could also make the case of, well, how much better? Who's the best player they can acquire by putting a 2030 or 2031 first round pick on the table? The answer to that question is, I don't fucking know, but this team is good enough at this point for us to consider the possibility.
Is it like, what do you use as a trade chip and a salary matching chip, though? Like,
you have PJ Tucker floating around in there. You can't trade Zubac.
But like, PJ is like $11.5 million. I'm talking about like a big name. Like, if we're talking about Zach LaVine or someone of that ilk.
So they can't do that trade anymore unless you're going to get rid of Norman Powell, who has gone from, I think people were kind of net negative on his contract to now it looks like, oh no, you can't move that guy. Why would you ever? I mean, they can consolidate, which helps their case. So, I mean, I proposed this. I don't mean to like harp on Kobe White. Kenny Beecham of Kenny for Real, who's a Bulls fan, hated it. Kobe White and like that 2030 one first, and then you include a swap in 2030. Like, does that get you Kobe White? use PJ
Oh, that's
Tucker and
interesting.
small salary X for that.
That's
That's
interesting.
probably my guess is that's not enough because you could even include Terrence Mann instead of PJ Tucker. But my guess is Chicago's front
The
office knows.
untouchable Terrence Mann. How dare you?
Well, the problem with what the situation the Clippers are in, though, is any primary trade
Yeah.
appeal that they send out will not convey for approximately eternity. And if you're a front office, unless you're OKC or maybe Houston at this point, where you just have unflappable job stability, it's tough to sell that to ownership to your fan base of
Yeah.
we're taking back salary filler in a 2031 or 2030 first round pick to give up this guy who's good.
Mm. It's a
But
really
like they
good
could
question.
could they get Dennis Schroeder without having to give up a first round pick outright? Like, can you get the money to work there? Maybe not. But like those are imagine making that type of an upgrade. It doesn't have to be a fringe star type. If you put Dennis Schroeder on this team, their offense is gonna hum more for sure.
Mm. I mean, I don't see why you couldn't. He's a free agent after this summer or
But
after
I'm
this
sure
season.
Brooklyn might, if the offer is, I probably would give up Mann for Dennis Schroeder. I'm not going to lie. So maybe Brooklyn looks at Mann as just, well, we'll monitor that contract moving forward. He could still defend really well when he's healthy. But like if you could do Mann in seconds for, and I don't know what the
Yeah.
money is on that one, you might have to include another small salary. Maybe, but like could Brooklyn say, well, we're going to get better seconds from someone else because the Clippers aren't exactly flush with
Right.
like draft picks in general.
No, like the draft capital is always going to be limiting to them because they just gave up everything for a while there. I don't know the answer to that. It's a really good one though. Like if they want to be buyers, I guess the question for me is even if they were buyers, one, what type of player can they bring in that truly moves the needle?
Right.
Secondarily, what would their ceiling be? Like genuinely.
It's tough. Well, it's tough without seeing what Kawhi looks like, or even we've seen this
Right.
movie too many times before.
Yeah.
But like that would be a reason for them to be hesitant or to wait. Is that it sounds like Kawhi is supposed to come back before Christmas, and so can you get a sample with him, and then you'll have a better idea of well, what do we need most, and then how much will that do for us? But it's also
Right.
tough. Like Kawhi could be playing right now and look like an all NBA player again. It's still tough to make that call because can you count on his body holding up into the playoffs? We just have this recurring track record, whether he's load managed, whether he's just playing more, that he is not
Mm-hmm.
going to remain healthy for that long. And so I think that adds another dimension of confusion to this situation.
Oh yeah, like here's the thing: when I hear something like that with Kawhi, where people are like, "Oh, he's going to be back at A, B, and C kind of date," my next follow up is, "Sure, that's great. When is he going to go out again?" That's where we are, and that's tough, and it's harsh to like ask that question, but that has to be the assumption. Look, I'm also at that point with Philly, for example, where I just cannot recently I can't have reasonable expectation with them in a playoff context with Embiid because he's just never healthy for the playoffs. I'm at this point now where I can't go in as an optimist anymore to their situation. Like they'll have to prove to me and everyone else that yeah, we actually can stay healthy in the playoffs. Like they'll have to show me once, at least once, for me to buy into that idea once more. And for Kawhi now, it's just like he's so good. He's so good when he's fully healthy. Like I'm not gonna sit here and act like he's not. But even if he does come back, we're not sure that he can stay healthy. Two, we're absolutely not sure if he can stay healthy for the playoffs, which is an entirely different beast and so much deeper into the season. It's just I don't want to go as far as saying maybe the contract that you could ship out is Kawhi because like come on, he's your ceiling raiser after all. But
Right.
like, yeah, I just can't rely on him at this point. Like even if I go out and act like a buyer, I can't bank on him coming back and giving me the production and the minutes that I need him to. I just
I
can't.
think the plus there though is that they're a more pleasant degree of confusing than we ever would have expected them to be.
Right. Yeah. That's a good way of phrasing it. All right, Dan, we have a couple of teams on the list still. So who are you going with? And you're still in the Eastern Conference.
I'm trying to now because I have too many picks for my final two teams, but I am pretty dead set on we need to talk about the Atlanta Hawks,
Mm-hmm.
who this season they've dealt with some injuries. Trae
Yeah.
Young has not been the best version of himself as a scorer. He's still a transcendent passer, 12.2
Yep.
assists per game or whatever he's at this year. What is going on in Atlanta where the defense has outperformed the offense
Right.
over their last 14 games, which is so ever since they beat the Celtics, they are 11th in points allowed per possession. They're actually getting burned from three during that stretch, though. You look at it and you understand some of it, where Clint Capella is still just really, he's a really solid rim protector. Everyone wants them to get rid of him and usher in the Onyeka Okongwu era, and there might be an argument for that with Capella going to free agency. He helps you end possessions. He still helps you
Yeah.
protect the paint. Those have been vital to both to their defense. The fact that you have a Dyson Daniels now who's just the consummate disruptor and the things that he can do. This team can generate turnovers now in ways that it could not before with the previous personnel. You've also had this trickle down effect with the way you're structuring your rotation, where if he plays in enough games, DeAndre Hunter might just win sixth man of the year at this point. So I look at them and they're another team where it's not similar to the Clippers, but like their draft pick is going to San Antonio this year. And yet we all kind of had them build for they're going to win, like if they really try, like 33 to 37 games. Is it time more to recalibrate how good Atlanta can be? And if so, is that another team where it's, well, could they do something that's spicier than we would have thought around the trip? Because the offense for this team has been disappointing, but when you consider the time that DeAndre Hunter missed, how many shots that Trae Young has missed, how much time Bogdan Bogdanovic has missed, you kind of look at it and say, all right, maybe we are waiting for the defensive performance to change a little bit, but this team isn't going to hover around the bottom 10 of offense forever. And like kind of looming in the backdrop, the Trae Young list, like when he's not on the floor, they're still a disaster overall. They're like minus 5.5 net rating. But like when Jalen Johnson's on the court during that time, they're a more comfortable minus 2.3. And the offense is still overall dog shit, but just like he's giving you enough. I never thought he was going to be this player. I want to make that clear. He's giving you what I call, and maybe other people call it, like more dead stop playmaking than where it's not, no, this guy needs to get the ball in movement. Like he will just set up shit. Now, the word I used, I was asked to, when I was describing every NBA team in one word at Bleacher Report, I used mysterious for them because I still can't figure out what their ceiling or even the purpose of this season needs to be for them. And then finally, just because I want to mention him, I think Zachary Risache, when you look at his usage, offense can be all over the place. He moves well off the ball, gets out in transition. We've seen some games and even like extended stretches where if the three ball is falling, I think he's already like, he kind of gets it on defense too right now. I've been mostly impressed with what I've seen from him. Even you're probably expecting more from a number one overall pick on balance, but relative to that draft class, like I think he's, and like they're not closing games with him. They're more inclined to do that with DeAndre Hunter. This team's like kind of deep. They could still use another backup playmaker because that's not really Kobe Buffkin's thing. And yet you have Dyson Daniels, you have Jalen Johnson, you have Bogdanovic. They're mysterious, they're fascinating, they're confusing, the whole nine, Mort.
Yep. It's super interesting in terms of whether or not they should be buyers as well, because that's been one of the things that the Hawks fan base has talked about a ton, because Jalen Johnson is who you brought up. His extension is going to kick in next year. So like he's going to earn 25.5 million more on his year-to-year salary than he does this year. So if you go out and like shop Larry Nance or Clint Capella's expiring contract, sure, you could do that. And if you get long-term contracts in for those guys, their bill is going to be pretty hefty by already next year. And if they're just lulling around, 500, can you really justify making that type of buy-in move at this deadline? This, to me, it feels like they're more of a let's make a big move in the summer type of team.
But can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
You know why they also confuse me? Because I think even with the Clippers, with all these other teams we talked about, I mean, Chicago was just stripped this motherfucker down already.
Right,
but what is it that you want the Hawks to trade for? I don't know that you can isolate. I think you get to an uncomfortable situation where you have to upgrade on what is already kind of a rock solid infrastructure in place where it's, well, we want to upgrade the big man spot and it like the minutes. And it's, well, good luck from Okongwu and Capella and Larry Nance Jr. floating there. And then Jalen Johnson, of course, is up front. I'm talking more about the center position, or it's
Yeah.
you're not going to go all in on a backup playmaker like when you have Trae Young. That's not going to be something
No,
you do.
you're right. It was the center position, if anything, right? Because as much as I love Onyeka Okongwu, and I've been banging that drum too, that he should start, I will say this: Brad Rowland, who does Locked On Hawks, he did convince me that look, Yeka is great, but he's just too damn short. Like the size advantage in the league now is just size is coming back. It's made a comeback. Onyeka is 6'8". Like he's so good at what he does. He's just not a starting center because of that size. Like I've really had a come to Jesus moment with him because for 2 years I was like, start him. I don't care. Start him because he's too good not to. But I'm getting it now. Like I'm getting why that's not happening. So it would have to be the center position. But like you said, who do you go for there? Who's available? Who is one, a legitimate upgrade for the long term, who fits the timeline, like who can build something sustainable with his team? I don't know the answer to that. Two, even if you do identify the right player, is that player one available, and two, at what price point, right? It's I don't think we should factor in the fact anymore that they don't have their own pick because it's a sunk cost. Like I think optics, they will be shitty regardless. Like if the Spurs win Cooper Flag with Atlanta's pick, yeah, it's gonna suck. But like they have no control over that situation. So eventually we just have to focus on them and their process. And I don't know whether they should just lean into the youth for the rest of the year and just say, look, screw it. We're just going to play the young guys, develop them a ton, and then go into next year more ready to compete. Or if you should prioritize winning.
I don't. But here's my thing: is who are they not playing of the guys that like your Zachary Richer is playing over 25 minutes a game. Dyson Daniels is playing over 34 minutes a game. Jalen Johnson leads them in
Right.
minutes per game. I think they're the way they're doling out minutes, like they basically have this like perfect split between Capella and Okongwu up front. I think that's why they're confusing to me. Is that I understand you have to use that pick as a sunk cost, and I guess you could just say we're going to stand pat, make sure that we're not sending them a great pick. But I would have told you before the season, and clearly incorrectly, that they are more likely to tear it down than be in the conversation of, is this a team that should be making upgrades? And I know that they just got waxed by Denver, but like I'm kind of in the latter camp of they either need to do nothing or can they make, it doesn't have to be a huge upgrade, but do you reunite with Dennis Schroeder as a backup point guard if you can figure out the way to make the math work there without giving up a ton of draft equity? Does that help you? That's why they've confused me. And I'm wondering, I of course want to know if the defensive stuff is sustainable. I know that Trae Young has been trying harder for 2 years. He's still bad. Like that's just, you talk about size. He's small and slight. Like that's just the inherent downside to him. But this team is, they're another one who I find pleasantly confusing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And DeAndre Hunter, I haven't spoken enough about him on this pod this year. He's been so much better. Like it seems like he's figuring stuff out. Like I know it's only a 14 game sample size, but like he's cut out the fat of his shot profile. He's far more assertive this year than he's ever been before. It feels like he's gotten the green light to an extent he's never had before, and he's like, okay, fine, I love that. Like give it to me. If there's this Harrison Barnes pivot, that's the player I compared him to, and just in terms of the shot profile, that's interesting moving forward too. Like that's not something we should just kind of dismiss.
That's interesting. I feel like there's still room for him to kind of like trim fat out of his shot profile. Like
yeah, still no, but he's on the right way. Like he's on the right path.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't argue with anything he's done offensively for them this year. So I think it's definitely a positive indicator that when you kind of look at it, it does feel like he's making, even if you're going to see him take mid-range jumpers, it just feels objectively like those decisions and shots are coming off quicker. So he is, I think once he plays in more games, unless they decide that, hey, this is someone who needs to be a starter, which I mean, he's been good enough to have that conversation, he'll be in the 6th man of the year running for sure. But they've been, I did not look, and I say we need to couch all this with the fact that it's not like they're 15 games over 500. They're 13-12. But this is a team that I thought was like they're 7th in the East, which I guess is maybe where it's weird because they're probably where you would expect them to be. You would have said the Hawks are going to finish anywhere between 7-13, right? Or 7-10, 7-11. And yet they're here. and they're not here in the same way I would have expected them to get here.
Right. No, I agree. It's been an odd year for them, but I do think pleasantly surprised. That's probably the category I fall into. Plus, can also, like, you and I did the League Pass rankings as we do every single year. They're fun to watch. That counts as a plus in my book. Like, Jalen Johnson objectively is one of my, like, he's so fun to watch. And I don't think I've seen a single person so far go, oh yeah, I'm not entertained by watching him play. Like, 6'9", super long, can initiate the offense, has decided to take a little bit more shots this year, which is like, yes, love it. Like, more of that, please. Secondary playmaker. I don't think he's done either in developing at all. I think there could be another leap coming next year. Like, I am interested to see where this team goes.
Yeah, they're I guess this is like a combination of fascinating and confusing.
Yeah. Another team that's, I think, confusing, at least to some extent, that's the Denver Nuggets. Nikola Jokic is playing MVP caliber basketball, and it feels like we're watching a man, like, single-handedly going up against an opponent every single night. Like, I'm just not counting in everyone else around him. Like, Jamal Murray that situation is getting concerning in all caps. I'm super impressed by Michael Porter Jr. Like, he's played all 22 games this year. He played 81 out of 82 last year. Is he durable all of a sudden? Because that kind of changes the math on this team as well.
Not on defense, he's not durable, apparently.
Right.
Neither here nor there.
That's part of the conversation too. I love what Christian Brown has done. Like, I wrote an article about him early in the season where he was hitting those 57% from the field. I was like, well, surely this is not sustainable. And now we're 22 games into the season. He's still hitting 57% of his shots. So he's basically saying, hey, shut up, Mort. Don't write that kind of bullshit about me. He's doing well. Like, there are a lot of these components that are doing so well. And despite those elements, you're looking at Jokic and you're just sensing the drop off between him and the next man up is so stark. You never feel as though the guys that I just mentioned are anything but, like, bystanders. It's I don't understand what's going on. Like, when Jokic doesn't play, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but basically they turn into the league's worst offense. When he is on the court, it's the league's best. I even think it's the net rating too. It's such a preposterous season. I just don't know what to make of it. Are they good enough to the point where if they just get into the playoffs,
nope,
Jokic can just Jokic his way to, like, a Western Conference final spot? I don't know.
Here's the thing. And so, just to back up you, because this is a number that everybody should be tracking right now. Right. The Nuggets are 31.2 points better per 100 possessions with Nikola Jokic on the floor than off. That is second in the league, only to Christian Brown, who plays a good amount of minutes with Nikola Jokic. And that kind of helps. This team does confuse me, because I think when even you point to, here's why they're confusing, is that there's probably no one. We like to, especially when you cover the entire league, is to try and boil things down, distill them down to these one or two factors. And I don't know that you could do that with Denver Nuggets, because it feels like a series of bad decisions that have led them here. And forget about the Bruce Brown stuff from a couple years ago. They couldn't keep him, but by losing both him and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, your fit across the roster is less intuitive. This isn't about anymore that, can Peyton Watson and Christian Brown be good? It's about, are you getting the same two-way squeeze from a team environment out of all of your guys? And the answer is no. And then you've also wasted, if you wanted to go, like, let's use KCP as an example. He has not been good in Orlando offensively.
He has not.
Here's the thing about him, though. Compared to Christian Brown and Peyton Watson, he can blend two different offensive roles. And I know that Christian Brown's done a little bit more ball handling this year, but what is Peyton Watson? If he's not going to be in transition, they're probably using him more as a stationary shooter. What is Christian Brown in the half court if he doesn't have the ball? He's going to cut. KCP did all that stuff while also scoring jumpers or taking jumpers in motion. So you're losing just these elements there, and the resources, which were few to their credit, that you had to improve your team, you have whiffed on them in ways that it's not just that you whiffed, it's the predictability behind said whiffs. Who thought signing Reggie Jackson with the mini mid-level and giving him a player option was a good idea at the time? Literally nobody. Right. Who thought the same thing about doing that with Dario Saric, who you probably could have gotten for the minimum? Nobody thought that. Russell Westbrook
I have to own up to that one. I believed in that. I believed in that acquisition. I really did, and I am paying for it right now.
Here's the other thing, though, is that what you also did, though, and this just speaks to, I think, it makes it harder to build your rotations when the talent is less of an intuitive fit together or checks as many boxes as it can, because even put simply, they're sixth in offense. That's not technically the problem, but their shot profile is just no one's beginning to replace the 3-point volume or threat level you got from KCP. But what you also did, you exacerbated that issue by bringing in both Russell Westbrook and Dario Saric. So even if both of those names look good in a nutshell, you created a circumstance where, well, if they're going to play together, that's not going to look great. And then, okay, we could stagger them, but that's going to have a direct influence on how you build out the rest of your rotation. And so then you combine that with whatever's going on with Jamal Murray, who I think the charitable way to put it is he is one of the most turbulent roller coasters in the NBA. But like, this is just someone, what is he? Last 15 games, sub 32% from three. Like that's supposed to be, that should probably be your best 3-point. Michael Porter Jr., of course, but like your second best floor spacer right now. No, like your second best floor spacer is Nikola Jokic because he decided to up his own volume from three, although that's come down a little bit, I think, since he's returned from his 3-game absence. My point is
he's only at a measly 50.6% from three this year now.
What are his attempts up to, though? I haven't even looked. He was at like over 5 at one point.
Yeah, so 4.4 now. He's become a little bit more modest taking them.
And who cares? That's not his job. So I think that's where they've really missed the mark, is that I think you could say, let's just say you had kept KCP, and it's just that makes your rotation easier to build out, your staggering patterns easier to build out. Now you've created this problem where Nikola Jokic is logging more minutes than ever. You're more dependent on him than ever. And yes, he's an Iron Man, but this is why I said a quick no. I was being like a snarky a-hole, but it's true. It's not just get into the playoffs, this team, because to just get into the playoffs is going to run Nikola Jokic into the ground, it looks like. And that is like, that's not great. And so I don't know. They're confusing because so many of their mistakes they were just seen in real time. Let's do this in a vacuum. Let's throw everything else out that really wasn't a choice. Or you could say, well, at least they used the mini MLE. All these other teams didn't. You let KCP walk for nothing. That was one of your 6 most important players last season. And you let him go for nothing. That is bad asset management. It is terrible. We're now seeing reporting that they weren't open to sign and trade scenarios, and then they kind of were at the last minute, but weren't really. And so I don't know if Calvin Booth has been handcuffed at all by ownership because of what they're willing to pay for this team. But there's not one problem. Everyone wants to distill it down to the one problem. This is like a 2-year degradation of what looked like a very sustainable championship core. And it's disappointing as hell because they have one of the 10 best basketball players of all time on their roster in his prime right now.
Yeah. So I don't think personally that KCP was worth the contract, but I do agree with you that they should have gotten something out of it at the very least instead of losing him for nothing, because you can't go back-to-back years of losing essential wings in the manner that they did after winning a championship and then expect, oh yeah, we're fine. So I agree with that perspective. Now, I do think I think internally, this is my thesis. Like, I could be wrong. I think the way that they're looking at it is 1 step back, that being this year, 2 steps forward next year, because you're kind of forcing Christian Braun, Peyton Watson, and Julian Strother into these fairly big roles, and for them to come back significantly better next year. What makes that pill so hard to swallow, and this is where I empathize and sympathize with Nuggets fans, is that you're spending arguably the best season of Jokic, like the 29 season. That's always like one of, the best superstar seasons you have out there. You're wasting that on hey, let's take a 1 step back season. I don't think you can allow yourself to do that with
Well,
Yoke.
it doesn't, and isn't that especially true when this one step back, because you look at the guys they're
Mhm.
quote unquote doing this for, who, by the way, I don't think Christian Brown and Peyton Watson are the issue. Yeah, where there's nights, what was the game that they dropped? Was that to before the Atlanta Hawks win? I was already trolling it. Why am I forgetting it? But like you watch back,
The Wizards game
no, the
where
Wizards, duh.
Jokic, yeah,
Just deciding not to really play defense and putting up zero resistance there, like that's weird.
yeah,
But those aren't the problems. And this one, maybe it was tougher to predict, but you can't play this sustainability card or 2 years, because really, I mean, last year they were fine. So it's 1 year, take a step back to take 2 steps forward. Can you
right.
guarantee you're taking 2 steps forward when none of this is in service of finding the second best player on a title team?
That's a good question. I don't know the
And
answer
so
to
is
that,
the
honestly.
miscalculation that they thought Jamal
Yeah.
Murray was and could continue to be that player. And that's a little bit more
Yeah.
understandable, just because, yes, Jamal Murray's always been a roller coaster, but he has hit some of, not just in Nuggets history, he's had some of the biggest playoff
Right.
performances in NBA history.
I think it was already pretty clear when he had the ACL tear that there was skepticism about how, like, he was already volatile before that. And then, how many players have we not seen come back from ACL tears or Achilles tears and have these wild, varying outputs in games? So I think that was always a fear. For them to actually win the championship after the ACL tear was always something that was like, whew, like a big, at least they got one kind of moment. Um, I do have a question to you about that, though, just in the Jamal Murray specifically. If he wasn't playing with Jokic, if he was signing elsewhere instead of signing that extension, like what would that have looked like right now?
I don't know, because look, we have we have a career long track record of the minutes he plays without Nikola Jokic mostly sucking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just I like it's that's a tough question. I don't think they could have made any other decision other than to extend him, just because what are you
Right.
going to do? You got into that situation. Um, so it's just, yeah, I, it's so, that's such a tough question. I don't know what he would be independent. I think you could make that case for almost anyone on this roster, but they've definitely been less built to withstand even like the slightest, like the Aaron Gordon injury, or Aaron Gordon
Right.
not being on defense what he was last year, basically. It's really tough for them to try to figure all this out. And my follow-up question here would be, because I don't know, like they don't have second round picks to trade right now. There's also, what is, like, DeAndre Jordan just still gets minutes over Zeke Naji. How I defended the Zeke Naji extension when it was signed by saying having a mid-level contract that you can flip will have value. But now you've just reached the point where you're going to need to include assets to get that deal off. And like, this dude can't even see the
Yeah.
floor over age 87, DeAndre Jordan. What is going on here? How bad and they're over 500. They're in the top half of the league of both offense and defense, 6th in offense, 14th in defense. Is there at any point, do you think they'll be bad enough to where Nikola Jokic's MVP case becomes compromised? Like, someone asked me this the other day and I didn't have a good answer. I
Mm-hmm.
said, if
Mm-hmm.
they're ever not 6th in the West, that feels kind of arbitrary, but that just like the benchmark where if
Oh
they're
yeah.
going to tumble past that, uh, that would really hurt his MVP case. I
Absolutely.
don't have a good answer though.
I don't think I have a good answer, but like I do have an answer, and that is yes, absolutely. Look, here's the thing: we've seen so many valid MVP candidates down, in history, not win it because of win-loss records. So like, yeah, absolutely. That's always been historically tied to the award, probably minus Westbrook because like the Oscar Robertson thing with him and the triple double. So and like even though Yoke himself is averaging a triple double right now, it's more of an it's not that impressive anymore because Russ did it like 4 years. So he's not going to get that same the same luxury, so to speak. But yeah, I absolutely think that's going to have an effect. Yeah, I would be shocked if it didn't, even though he is the best player in basketball. But that's again that the NBA loves this, Dan. You know this, like this is going to have fans debating this for
Oh yeah.
years down the line if he's
Oh
not
yeah.
winning it. So the NBA is like, yes, we love this. Now the award is going to go to someone else. And I have no idea who's even like the front runner. If it's not Jokic, is Anthony Davis, but they're
No,
not
it's
even playing.
probably Shea or Tatum, I would think, would slide into that
Oh,
spot.
well, Shea's okay, but like Tatum, that's such a
Oh, that's not. I
stretch.
think that's unfair. I think that's unfair.
That's such a stretch. You think so?
I will
I
say
just
what's most
I just
disturbing
think
about
he's such a big level below Jokic, though. Like
that
such a big level below.
that's the most disturbing part about this team is I'm already seeing people proposing trades. I don't think moving Michael Porter Jr. ain't going to solve
Right.
anything for this team is my point. And I don't even think you could, if you want to step ladder your
Yeah.
way with contracts using some of the young guys, it's not a one player thing. This is a two, I think it's more than two off seasons worth because we got to go back to the Zeke Naji extension, but this is a multiple years worth of missteps to end at this point. And they treated this, I
Yeah.
understand the desire to want to be sustainable rather than maximize a very finite window.
Mm-hmm.
You missed. Like you didn't extend anything. You're now threatening to close it before. And this again, they don't suck. They're just not as good as a team with the best player in basketball in the heart of his prime should be.
I will say this: if there's a Michael Porter Jr. trade out there, along with Zeke Naji, it's Zach LaVine. LaVine next to Jokic would be just perverse. It would be perverse.
I just don't know. Like, and then the Jamal Murray of it all, I guess at that point, it's because you're already sixth in offense. What is that?
And then you move up, you probably move up substantially because he's such a good scorer. He's so dangerous off the ball. He gives you the 3-point shooting that they sorely need. He gives you the cutting, he gives you the slashing, he gets you to the free throw line.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay. He's an upgrade, but like at that point, you're substituting Michael Porter Jr. is giving you 3-point volume. So you're kind of almost like maybe getting a little bit more out of Zach LaVine, and there's the off the dribble element for sure, and the foul drawing.
Right.
I totally get it. But like that's all the shit Jamal Murray's supposed to be doing for you.
I know, but he's not doing it. And look, I get it. And if I'm the Nuggets, I'm not saying that the Zach LaVine trade is like gonna catapult myself into the championship. But I do think if there is a trade out there that would be intriguing, that's probably the one.
Which is the only move because you're not gonna. I mean, you just extended. You have the Aaron Gordon Jamal Murray extension, so you can't move them. I don't think they didn't. And then after that, it's okay. These other guys have value, Brown, Watson, but they make nothing. So it's not going to be fixed via trade. I think the Nuggets, it's really the Jamal Murray play better button like that. And does that button exist anymore is the question. Did I oversimplify it?
No, I think you needed to simplify it like that because you're right. And I guess the broader question really is, what the hell does this team look like if Jamal was back to Jamal? Are they competing for number one in the West? Like, what are we? I don't know the answer to that.
They probably would be, which is scary. I mean, you still have the whole really bench of it all thing. It would still be an issue.
Right. Oh man, it's tough. It's tough.
It's confusing, you might say.
They are definitely confusing. All right, Dan, we need to wrap up with the last two teams. So who you got?
You knew I was billowing in the wind on my selection here to the point where I changed it again. I was thinking about the Bucks, but I think that we're kind of starting to understand that no, they weren't as bad as they were. And if the offense is going to catch up, can some of the defense improvement be sustainable? I'm more hopeful for them. And I also feel like, I don't know if you're the same. I've talked about them way too much because of what happened in the early part of the season. It was between the Pacers or Miami, and I'm starting to just realize there's something going on with Indiana, but it's also when you look at that team, you probably could have sussed this out that, okay, if Tyrese Halliburton wasn't going to be Tyrese Halliburton, if they were going to gravitate so far away from Tyrese Halliburton being the center of everything, they might always just look not so great, and that the defense would continue to be not so great. And that if Miles Turner regressed, the defense would be even worse than not so great. So I'm going to Miami here. I'm honestly asking you, what are the Miami Heat? I was ready to pencil them in for dead. And you can still you could still convince me that that's the route to go, but they're another team where they pick up that win over, I think it was Minnesota on November 10th. And since then, they're 9-5. They have a top 10 offense and defense. And just like Terry Rozier still isn't playing. all that well. But okay, Bam Adebayo, we know what he is on defense, and the offense feels like it's starting to tick up a little bit for him. And Tyler Hero's been mostly magnificent. And we're
Yep.
seeing, okay, not vintage Jimmy Butler, but you knock Jimmy Butler down like he's still figuring it out when he's going to be available. I don't, and then yet you look at this stretch, Mort, and the
Right.
only player with like the main players with positive point differentials per game during this stretch are Bam Adebayo, just barely, and then Hayward Highsmith is like kind of their main guys. Otherwise, you're getting into the Duncan Robinson, the Alec Burks of it all. I don't know what to make of Miami other than I don't trust them to do anything but date
Right.
everything I say.
So if we agree that the Bulls were the most confusing teams from like a direction perspective, the Heat they have to be the most confusing team from like an on-court perspective, I think, this year. I
Yeah.
can't get a proper read on them at all. Like, again, it's one of those situations like if you told me before the season that Bam Adebayo would be shooting, the way that he's shooting over the course of the full season, I know he's been better of late, but like if you told me 22 games into the season he'd be, sub 45% from the field, he wouldn't be all that efficient, I'd be like, uh-oh, like they're in trouble. Jimmy is Jimmy. He'll figure stuff out. Like he's just pacing himself through the regular season. He
And
always
he's
does.
done.
Which
I do think to his credit, there was a point where he was like kind of only flipping the fourth quarter switch to start the year. And I think he's starting to understand that it's not going to fly as much. But
I feel like we say that every year, though. I feel like that's the thing that if not every year, every other year, I feel like we say that where it's like, Jimmy, come on, you can't wait. Like you have to play over the course of the full game. Like you have to participate. This is Miami being Miami. I'm not going to lean into the whole, Heat culture thing because I think it's BS. Like every team works hard. You're not the only team in the NBA that works hard. That's stupid. But they just have, I think it's cohesion is the word I was looking for. I mean, this roster has been together. These guys have been together for a while. They kind of know their way around each other. They know their games. Coach Bo is still around. He's been there forever now. I feel as though they're like one of the few teams that can lean in on the experience level and roll off, a ton of wins in a row where even though they've come out and looked really poor to begin the year, they sort of ramp themselves up into some level of like a new baseline, more or less, and saying, okay, we might have been below that baseline before. Now we're here. That's our new floor. And then we start off like this. It's kind of impressive because a lot of teams, when they have a rough start, they kind of say, oh, okay, well, we've seen our worst and that's really bad. The Heat can sort of identify and like close chapters, I feel like, and say, okay, we were shitty for like 10 games. Now we've rolled off a couple of games in a row where we've been looking pretty good. That's our new starting point. Like that's where our new identity.
I'm wondering how much helps too. It feels like they've dispensed with, and I know availability was part of this, but it's okay. We're not going to start Kevin Love or Nikola Jovic next to Bam Adebayo. We're going to have Duncan Robinson with Hayward, Highsmith, and Tyler Hero and Jimmy Butler when we're all healthy. That lineup is killing opponents, and it took them until like the second half of November to get to that lineup. And so you definitely figure out some stuff there. They've gotten, I mean, look, I think Hayward Highsmith's been fine. Pell Larson, I think he's injured right now, but like that is not a name. I was intrigued by him. We talked about him on the Miami Heat look ahead. Like he's played real minutes for them, not necessarily something that you would have ticketed him for at the beginning of the year. I think what my issue is, and I don't know, I haven't seen enough personally progression from Jaime Jaquez on the offensive end. I was probably counting on too much of that from him. I think, and this is now becoming a repetitive point for me, so I don't even want to say it. I think I still am officially at the point, though, even though they have these better vitals and we're seeing some things turn around for them. Do you agree with the thought process behind it being if Miami wants to be where Miami aspires to be in this moment, they need a new best player? Like, do you view Jimmy Butler or Bam Adebayo as capable of either one, being the best player, not, I won't even say a title winner, but a contender? Or do you think that between them, they amount like the sum of the parts between them amounts to even a fringe contender? Because you do. Okay. I struggle to get there now.
Look, Jimmy Butler has proven us all wrong so many times that I feel as though if I'm sitting here and saying I don't think he can get there anymore, I'm just setting myself up. I'm
Okay.
setting myself up. He's that good. And like we know what, you know, Jimmy Butler can be when he is at his best. He is the absolute best ceiling raiser in the league when he's on. And nothing in his game to me indicates that he can't get back to that level. Like unless his body fails him. But those are things that I can't comment on that. Like I'm not I'm not on the Heat's medical staff. I'm not on their
Well,
like
so
I don't know. I have no idea what his body looks like, but what I do know is that if he's out there, if he's feeling good, if he's feeling healthy, he can step up to that level. He's done it repeatedly over the course of the last few years when we counted him out. So what argument do I even have to say no, he can't get there anymore? Like age, I guess, but like we've said the same thing about LeBron before. We've said the same thing about Kevin Durant before, and we've been kicked in the mouth whenever we've said that. So I'm just going to basically say, no, I'm not going to question Jimmy Butler to be that
Well,
guy.
then what is it quickly? What do you view it as what this team needs? And I'm sure, look, the Terry Rozier of it all has definitely complicated that because now you
Right.
want someone who's supposed to be what Terry Rozier was to you. But it still feels like even then, this roster seems one significant rotation player short. And again, maybe I'm just waiting too much of what we saw earlier in the season where there was all this awkwardness. But I even look at the rotation and some of the guys that have turned things
Right.
around. And again, the players that have been performing well for them. And it just feels like there's something significant missing here. And I can't pinpoint it other than to say, like, the route to go would be, well, they need like another kind of shot creator with size who won't submarine the defense, which is just like such a high end need.
Well, they need speed too. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's an older team. It's a slow team. You know, it's a team that loves to operate in the half court. They're not running a lot. They're not a quick team. I think they were hoping to change that with Terry Rozier because Rozier can be a rocket at times. He hasn't been. I wonder if that's part of the issue is when Rozier got traded there, he kind of said, okay, look, I'm going to try to learn Miami Heat basketball instead of being, that firecracker he used to be in Charlotte, for example. Like I've been disappointing to see him like scale back and only take, 9 or 10 shots per game or whatever the number is. Like he has to take more. He has to, like, when he gets a defensive rebound, he has to just fly down the floor. And he's not. He's looking at Spo half the time. This team wants to play a little bit too slowly for my liking. Yeah, so if it's, I don't know if it's an internal fix or if they need external help to come in, like in terms of like a trade or an acquisition, someone who can come in and basically say, yeah, we need to rush this thing through, but they need more speed. Like Tyler Hero is the only one right now who I feel pushes the buttons, like just forces the issue on this team. Like even Jimmy, Jimmy will do it occasionally, but like also he's pacing himself. Let's just be real about it. He's
Yeah. But
35. He's
there's,
pacing himself.
yeah, you look at this and they're dead last in average offensive possession time after grabbing a defensive rebound. So there
Yeah.
needs to be, I don't know that they have the personnel to do that. I guess you mentioned Tyler Hero. There's Bam
Yep.
Adebayo, the idea of Terry Rozier. I mean, Butler's capable of pushing
He
more. And
is.
I don't know why you look at this personnel as Miami and you're not playing faster. Not that I think they're clearly not super duper athletic, but
Right.
when you look at, there are spacing limitations. When Terry Rozier is shooting like this,
Right.
when Bam is just not like he's never been a floor spacer, and when Jimmy Butler is not going to be a willing 3-point shooter, why wouldn't there be more of an urgency to go up against defenses that haven't been set?
Well,
So good call out by you on the speed thing.
yeah, and it's ironic because the most athletic player isn't really playing. Khalil Ware.
Yeah, I mean, but I guess I did think that they were going to play him next to Bam a ton at some point this year, so that might be a slightly of a big deal. They're just a team where
Yeah,
they're
I
kind
do
of an
think it's a big
asset
deal.
no man's land too, because now
Right.
you're at a point where I think a lot of people came to view Tyler Hero as filler salary. I never quite got there, but now he's been indispensable this year. We could just flat out say it. Where would they be without Tyler
Right.
Hero?
Right. No, I had never bought into the fact that he was filler salary either. I do think there was a point in time where it was fair to wonder what was the ultimate potential in him, and now he's showing us that we shouldn't have doubted him, which I
There,
love that, by the way. I always love that.
Yeah, and look,
Uh,
Cooper Moorhead had pointed this out too. I think even the bigger term of events was when he was kind of going through that rough patch and his shot profile still wasn't reverting back to where it was. That
right.
was a big deal because Tyler Hero's shot profile, it's a stark change. It's not something that's got here gradually. It's almost like we talk about Jimmy flipping a switch. He just flipped the shot profile switch this year. And the fact that it's holding, I think, is a really big deal. And I think that's why it got harder to envision. This is who do we view as sort of the poster child for incremental improvement? Probably a Jaylen Brown or someone along
Right.
those lines.
That's a good call.
Tyler Hero's kind of just got here, like just reworked his shot profile. All the credit in the world to him. I just don't know. I think it means a ton to this team. I'm just when you don't have a ton of trade assets because you now like what is Terry Rozier worth on the trade market? Not much, and you gave up a pick to get him. You don't have a ton of first rounders to trade, and we also can't really pinpoint a specific like of all the players that are going to become available on the trade market. Yeah, Kobe White might look good here. Like, how are you get like what are you do you have enough assets to go out and get him? And there are just players who you're going to wind up giving up. At this point, is their most expendable salary filler? I do believe people will probably assume it's Duncan Robinson. Has it become Terry Rozier? Just because of the emergence of this new version of Tyler Hero?
How much is guaranteed on his deal next year?
Yeah, it's I'm sorry, it's not partially guaranteed. It's like fully guaranteed. It's basically
Almost,
90% of the
Yeah.
contract or some weird number.
Let me. Yeah, see, I see it here as well. Okay, so basically, it's a 2-year contract or
Yeah.
a year and a half, roughly. I mean, see, that's always the tricky part, right? Like in a filler contract, if you have another year, because if this is the version of Terry Rozier you're going to get, are you really willing to pay him, 26.5 whatever million next year? I'm not really sure about that. But again, it does feel like Miami does have a tendency to handcuff certain players who they get in. I wonder why that is. It remember when I'm going to take you way back and I'm going to show my age here, but remember when Richard Jefferson was playing for the Spurs? He
Who's that?
basically said,
I'm so young, I don't even know who that player is.
He basically said it's going to take a year, if not two, to adjust to Pop and the Spurs system. It feels like that has become like the Heat story now, where it just takes guys so long if they're coming from outside organizations where they've been for a while to like get acclimated to how they're playing here. I'm not saying you should change head coach because Spo is brilliant. I don't want to go that route, but I do think they need to look themselves in the mirror and figure out how can we streamline this process a little bit better for a guy that we trade for? Because if we are going out there and fork over draft picks for guys who we want to help us win right now, and we torpedo their own value, we torpedo their own productivity, what the hell are we even achieving? I think that's a legitimate question they have to ask themselves. All right, Dan, let's close it up with the Sacramento Kings from my perspective. I think they're confusing. Well, I mean, there's
They're
the
stressful.
simplistic way. Yeah. So there's I want to break it into two tiers because there's the obvious concern that DeMar came in, takes a lot of like mid-range shots that hurt their spacing. Like that's one of the obvious things that we knew about. What we probably didn't foresee was Keegan Murray hitting 29% of his shots from deep, 42% overall, sitting at just 12 points per game, and seeing him take this back seat to like DeMar, to De'Aaron Fox, to Sabonis. Like, I think all of us kind of assumed that DeMar would not be perhaps as trigger happy as he's been in Sacramento, and that Keegan would find ways, more than he's done so far, to get himself involved offensively. Before I give you the word, I will say this. Credit to Keegan Murray for becoming their best defender.
Oh,
and
yeah.
also improving his rebounding to the extent that he did.
Mhm.
I really love to see that improvement on his side. But like the offense for him, that was always his number one skill. And it's probably going to be his number one skill for the rest of his career. But at some point, the Kings have to lean into it. Like they've let him play this sort of complementary role for too damn long. It's time for them to empower Keegan Murray.
How do you do that with the current? Because I agree with you that I'm not shocked that he's been marginalized to some extent on offense,
Right.
but you definitely didn't expect him to shoot this poorly to start the year. I don't like, how are you supposed to unlock Keegan Murray with the current infrastructure that you have. It's not just you have Malik Monk too, in addition to DeMar DeRozan and Domas Sabonis and
Right,
De'Aaron Fox. And another thing that's happening here, which I does think does speak to the importance of Keegan Murray, is that Sacramento is losing the 3-point value by essentially 3 makes per 100
right.
possessions, which I think, given how poorly Keegan Murray and Kevin Huerter have both shot to start the year, coupled with the shots DeMar DeRozan wants to take and the shots that Domantas Sabonis does not take in super high volume, a -9 per 100 possessions is not nothing, but I would expect it to have been worse if you laid out this criteria for me. They're confusing as well to me because I don't necessarily know what your solve is going to be. You could definitely tell with the way that Mike Brown is rolling out some of his lineups that even he's trying to figure some of it out. But when you get into, if you're trying to spotlight problems, like this team is 7th on offense, they're 13th on defense. They have like the biggest discrepancy between their win differential and then their actual point differential. And that'll come back to, all right, well, look at how much time this team has spent in the clutch. And it's the most, or it's the second most in the NBA behind the Charlotte Hornets. And now they are now 5-9 in those situations.
Right.
And so I found myself thinking, are they kind of just, well, his performances for maybe not Huerter normalizes because he's actually been pretty bad ever since the 2023 playoffs, at least not the Kevin Huerter that you thought you were getting. But as Keegan Murray's performance normalizes, maybe you string together for more availability. Like we know DeMar had missed some time. Is this just a matter of if other possessions had gone the Kings' way that we're talking about, like they're not even on this list for us? Or do you view this as more of a wholesale issue where it's, oh no, this team belongs here? And it's not, I've thought a lot about in terms of how can I upgrade the secondary front court rotation? Like get me Larry Nance Jr. on this team or get me Dorian Finney-Smith on this team. Do you think that the issues are bleaker than that?
I will say this. I think their issues are they tried to split the difference and try to be better defensively while sacrificing some offense instead of leaning into one side of the ball. We saw 2 years ago how dynamic they were when they chose a direction. Then they started saying, "Oh, okay, look, we didn't, we had a tough 7-game series loss to Golden State in the playoffs. Let's build on this." They went from the number 1 offense in the league to the 13th best offense in the league because they kind of said, "Oh, we also want to compete defensively." They gave up their edge, Dan. That was the problem for me. You sometimes just have to lean into who you are.
Mhm.
This team is trying to have it both ways when they don't have the roster to do so. It's the same problem the Lakers are facing with having a bunch of one-way guys on their roster. You cannot, as an NBA organization, if you found your niche, pivot away from that and just assume things are going to fall into place. And I think that's what the Kings did. They are talking about defense way more than they've done in the recent years, where I'm like, guys, at best, you're going to make a modest defensive improvement and it's going to cost you potentially the number 1 offense in the league, which could win you more games. That's where I see the biggest challenge being here. It's like an internal direction, an internal compass, if you will, that's just been out of whack. So we can sit here and talk about whether this necessitates moves, whether there are greater issues at hand. I think this is an organizational change that should not have happened. Lean into the offense. This was who you were.
They're 7th though. I know they're in transition less compared
Right.
to last season. I think they're 22nd in transition frequency, which, I mean, just any team that has De'Aaron Fox and is in the bottom 10 of transition frequency is just going to feel super weird to me. But like, it's not, when you look at like sort of the actual frequency with which they're spending it hasn't dropped off a ton. So, I mean, as of right now, when we're recording this on Monday night in advance of games that are going to be happening, 14.4% of their plays come in transition. That's down from 16% last year. So it's the difference between ranking 5th and 22nd, but it's not like this huge decline. And that's why I'm sort of wondering, and I still think that this makes your point that I find them intensely confusing, is that it feels like this isn't they need to make a big trade. I don't know if necessarily, if you want to get into schematically, like, have they skewed too far towards trying to play both ends of the floor? I think that's fair. But I keep coming back to, I don't necessarily want to be a purveyor of optimism for a team that's this confusing, but like, it just feels as if they get a couple different breaks, they're going to be a much better team, and we're having a different discussion. I think the mega concern to me personally would come from, are they not going to do anything to deepen their rotation at the deadline? I'm talking about like finding a seventh, eighth man, whatever. They absolutely need to do that. And names I mentioned, like thrown out already, should be on the radar. Or do you think that this is just Keegan Murray in this larger offensive hierarchical system? Is this now his default? Because then that is a problem.
Right. That's a major issue if this is his default. And by the way, they're going to get better when Devin Carter comes back. I know he's a rookie.
He's not playing this season. There's just, even if he comes back, they're not relying on a rookie. I know a lot of fans were kind of thought that he could play if I don't see it, me personally.
Well, we'll find out. Like, if he's not going to play this year, the next year they're going to have an automatic upgrade right there. Because I do think that he could be another rotation piece that you alluded to. But no, look, we can boil this down to Keegan Murray. I think that is fair. They have not been able to utilize him the right way. I will also say this isn't exclusively at the feet of Mike Brown and the coaching staff. Keegan himself has had a little bit too much Patrick Williams in him this year. When it comes to, like, that sounded wrong. Oh my God. Not what I meant.
It sounded wrong on a bunch of different levels, actually. So
it really did. But you know what I mean, though? The passiveness, the fact that he's standing there, he's basically passing up on open shots occasionally. Like, he has to be more aggressive. Here's the thing. He is a 6'8", 225 forward who's nimble, who's got on-ball skills, who's got off-ball skills. He should be your best plug-and-play player on the entire team. Yet, he is not being utilized. You're forcing the ball through guys who you have to structure the offense around in a very odd way to optimize their own capabilities. Whereas the guy who's the most seamless fit of them all, and the guy you should be basically seeking out shots for, is getting broadly ignored. That's not great. That's on him. It's on the coaching staff. It's on everyone. I
think what's also been, I would say, an unintended consequence of the way that they're set up, because I think in the half court, defenses are just going to be inherently less concerned about certain guys. Or if you're going to be, okay, you have tacticians from the mid-range, awesome. Teams will mostly live with that. Is how much harder it seems like Keegan Murray needs to work for his shots to where, like, when you look at what this roster needs and just relative to the personnel, why is he taking fewer 3-pointers per 100 possessions than he was last season? There is no explainable reason, but when you watch, he's not going to be like, this can't be someone who's just getting catch and shoot opportunities, because the way that the Kings are built in the half court, in transition, different story for sure. But he's out in transition a little bit more this season than he was last season, as the Kings' overall transition frequency declines. And so in the half court, he almost has to work harder for his shots because he doesn't have the same room with which to work that he did when they had fewer stars or just a different type of offensive setup. But it also just feels weird to say this about a team that ranks 6th in points scored per possession. I think this relays back to why they're probably confusing, though.
Yeah, it is, because I honestly, I don't give two shits about their current offensive ranking of 7th, because when you look at the 3-point shot, for example, like, they're 21st in efficiency, they're 24th in attempts, their effective field goal percentage, they're 12th in the league. Like, it's just, there's so many avenues they can improve upon, where there is a pathway here for them to actually have the best freaking offense in the league. It's right there. It's just a matter of making the parts work. Maybe we're looking at,
and you make the parts work, though, with the parts that are there, because it sounds like to me what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that DeMar DeRozan should not be on this team then, because I don't know how you're going to fundamentally rework your offense unless you're saying, no, they need to stagger the hell out of their stars.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yes, that is absolutely what I'm saying. I'm saying two things. I'm saying that for sure. Stagger is the best way forward. Two, I also think it's about communication. One thing we know about DeMar, though, is he's not a guy who is unwilling to listen to coaches and listen to input. I think that this is a question of, wires being crossed in terms of expectation level. Like, you have to sit DeMar down, perhaps at the All-Star break, preferably sooner, but and ask him, look, would you be willing to take a step back for the betterment of the team? Like, you're 35. we're still going to feature you. You're still going to play at the end of games because we know you're a tough shot maker. We still want you to facilitate. You're still going to have the ball in your hands a ton, but we're not looking for you to take, those off angle turnaround 16-foot shots. Like, he's a phenomenal playmaker, and it feels like he hasn't really been able to explore that a whole lot during his stay here in Sacramento. Perhaps they could sell him. Look, Keegan is the key here for you to make a significant playoff run. Like, Lord knows he didn't have that in Chicago. Perhaps that is the play.
I almost wonder, I guess I just haven't noticed the same playmaking stuff. There's obviously a drop in assists per minute, but you would almost expect that. But do you have to play him fewer minutes because that gives you more optionality on who you can play away from the ball? Whereas DeMar, like, you can't really do a ton of that and have him be most effective. So that's interesting. So the conversation could almost be, you're playing fewer minutes. We'll probably still have you close, but like, you need to lean into more of just these more intuitive lineups than when there's some lineups that are going to have more talent, but they can also be redundant on the offensive end at times.
Right.
That team's confusing as hell. You're not going to catch any fight from me.
Right. Super confusing. I'm not really sure how you fix it. I will say this, and credit to everyone who's been saying this. They got the wrong bull over the course of the summer. It wasn't DeMar DeRozan that they should have gone for.
They wanted Caruso. That's the one that you want to see me get?
Well, then it would have leaned into defense, and we couldn't have that. No, obviously LaVine instead of DeMar DeRozan on this team would have been.
Yeah, I guess if you were going to go the look, you could do DeMar and Malik Monk for Zach LaVine.
Oh my God. Poor DeMar. No, that would be awful.
Man, sorry. That was a trip.
That was a trip. All right. So wait, am I just well, let's just wrap this up, right?
Yeah, you could close whenever.
I'm gonna close. Dan from Valley, thank you so much for joining me on this, the most confusing teams in the NBA tour that we've just been on. You and I be back for another episode where we're looking at a lot of trades. We'll be recording that in the coming days, but this is out first. You're obviously the co-host along with Grant Hughes at the HardwoodKnocks. Tell the good people listening in where they can find your work, sir.
You already said it. HardwoodKnocks, spelled exactly as it sounds. Come check us out.
Great, man. Everyone who listened in, thank you for doing so. And until we talk again, stay safe and enjoy yourselves, everyone.